candidate for West Virginia's 2nd District. Cathy Kunkel, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on. And as always, I like to get to know the candidate a little bit, but before transitioning into politics, tell me a little bit about some of your work experience, what you're gonna bring into this position.
Yeah, I've spent the last 10 years working in energy policy here in West Virginia. I've testified to the Public Service Commission on behalf of consumer groups. I've fought for stronger energy efficiency and renewable energy programs in West Virginia. And I've also done this kind of energy policy work on behalf of consumer and environmental and labor groups around the country, including most recently in Puerto Rico as well. And one of the reasons I'm running really is my frustration for the lack of political leadership here in West Virginia as our economy has been transitioning away from coal. There's really been no plan and no attempt to sort of revitalize our economy. It's just empty promises about bringing back the coal industry, which is not happening.
And we heard some of that even at the presidential level back in 2016. And so that's really interesting. Obviously, it's been a traditional part of the economy there. I've read some of what you've written about this, and you're not giving any false promises that it's going to be able to maintain. I mean, even without a big change in policy, it is trending downward. So if you were to get this position, what would your approach be? What is the path forward, if not sort of attempting to reinvigorate the coal industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think West Virginia's economy needs an infusion of federal infrastructure investment, just for basic things that we need to function in the 21st century, like rural broadband, like safe drinking water, transportation investments as well. And if we're talking about building an economy for the future here, it also means just guaranteeing basic rights for workers, including healthcare for all, public education, and labor rights. West Virginia has historically had a very strong labor movement, and we've seen that decline in the last 30, 40 years as we have in the rest of the country. And traditionally the working class in this country, the middle class, has been strong when we had a strong union movement, and we need to be making it easier and not harder for folks to join unions and to fight for rights as workers. So I think bringing in federal infrastructure investment and bringing in supporting small businesses and tourism and other sectors of the economy that can grow here in West Virginia as the fossil fuel economy declines, and then just overall across the board support for working families is what we need to create an economy here that is that is equitable for all of us and is not caught up in the boom and bust cycle that has always defined our economy here and that has never really brought lasting prosperity to West Virginia.
So your background's in energy, obviously that informs your approach to the future of the energy industry inside of West Virginia. And I saw on your website that you focus quite a bit on dealing with a number of different environmental issues, both inside of West Virginia, but also climate change, which of course goes across state and national boundaries. So your efforts in Congress will affect West Virginia, but also, depending on who we get as president, could be instrumental in dealing with the climate crisis at the national level. So what is your approach there?
Yeah, I mean, I think nationally we need a very strong commitment to addressing climate change. I mean, it's obviously affecting us across the country, across the world. Here in West Virginia, we've had a lot of severe flooding, deadly flooding in recent years, and we need to be making a commitment to cutting greenhouse gas emissions basically as rapidly as possible is what the science is telling us at this point. And from the perspective of coming from West Virginia, I want to fight to make sure that whatever climate policy is enacted at the national level, that Appalachia has a real seat at the table in that conversation, and that we're fighting to make sure that the debt that the rest of the country owes to Appalachia for the coal and the gas that have powered our country for so long is repaid in terms of federal infrastructure investment and other things that we need to revitalize our economies here and transition away from the fossil fuel industry.
The polling can certainly change at the national level, but as of right now, the top three generally in national polls, Biden, Warren, and Sanders, all at least in rhetoric say that they support something like a Green New Deal to deal with the climate crisis. Is that the sort of framework that you would want to support if you were to get into Congress?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally that's the framework that's needed. Is a rapid reduction in greenhouse gas emissions coupled with federal investments in infrastructure to help transition our economy, and particularly the parts of our country that have been very dependent on the fossil fuel economy.
Now, in terms of running in this race in West Virginia, I've actually read that that particular district is a particularly difficult district to run in because of the way the media markets work out. It's pretty costly to do advertising. I'm curious, coming in as someone who doesn't have a long history in electoral politics, how is that influencing the way that you're running?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. So, it's a very diverse district that goes from Charleston in the southern part of the state to the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, which is basically a suburb of DC and is in the DC media market, as you mentioned. But, for us, we're really focused on running a grassroots campaign here. We've been traveling throughout the district this fall. We've held over 20 house parties and town halls, and we're going to be keeping that up through the winter and hiring field staff and building out a campaign that's going to be, knocking on doors and having real conversations with West Virginians about the issues that matter in this state. So, we're not going to be by any means running a campaign that's, focused on winning through TV ads.
Okay, and based on my research, and I apologize if I just missed it, it didn't seem as if inside of the Democratic side that you're currently facing any opposition. Is that the case?
That's the case, yeah. And the filing deadline here in West Virginia is in January, so I can't say that with certainty yet, but that's the case at the moment.
And so it looks like, barring some change in the next few weeks, you would be going up against Alex Mooney, the current Republican incumbent. Tell us a little bit about Representative Mooney.
Yeah, so Representative Mooney has represented this district since 2014. He moved to West Virginia in 2013 to run for that seat, having lost an election in Maryland. And he has really been, quite frankly, a very absentee congressman in this district. He's very rarely seen in the district. I've never known of him to have an in-person town hall or to debate a candidate running against him. And he's really done very little for the district. The votes that he's taken to repeal the Affordable Care Act, to privatize the VA, I think have gone against the interests of his constituents here.
I was doing a bit of research on how the district has voted in the past few presidential cycles, and it seems like it's not one of the most blowout districts or anything like that, but it has trended red. And so I'm curious, based on what you said there, do you feel like it's sort of just an expectation that he doesn't need to campaign particularly hard, sort of like resting on his laurels sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's, generally his strategy has been to run with, TV ads and mailers and sort of run on the bandwagon of Trump and the Republican establishment. And so, I think one of the things that is really important to recognize about West Virginia, even though it is portrayed in the national media as a red state, is that it's also a very anti-establishment state. And I think we saw that last year when we had our school service personnel strike that sparked a wave of strikes around the country. That there's just a lot of people who are very frustrated with both the Democratic and the Republican establishments here, and who want to fight for basic things like public education and healthcare.
So you mentioned a couple of policies there, but you point out this anti-establishment streak. So how does that influence some of the other, as you're campaigning, you're doing these town halls that you've been talking about. What are some of the other issues that are being brought up by your potential constituents?
Yeah, I mean, well, the addiction crisis is huge in West Virginia, as it is in many parts of our country. And also infrastructure is huge. People are very frustrated by not having basic internet access. I have teachers telling me that they're, trying to teach their students about 21st century technology and they can't even get online. And so, there's just a real sense, I think, that West Virginia has been left behind by the establishment of both parties.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you point out that they're obviously frustrated with both parties, but that's the sort of thing that Donald Trump was very explicitly campaigning based on, was they've all ignored you. I'm going to be the one who isn't. Have you heard any sort of, is there still lingering trust in Donald Trump to potentially be the guy who's going to break through that?
I mean, sure, there's still a lot of support for Donald Trump in West Virginia. My sense is that it is not as strong as it was in 2016. And I think some of that, is the promises that Trump made, for example, to bring back the mines that simply have not happened.
Yeah. And so we mentioned a couple of different policy areas. Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned healthcare. What are some of your plans in that area?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, I support a Medicare for all universal healthcare system. I think it's very important that we have, a single payer system, universal healthcare that covers everyone, and that takes the burden of health insurance away from businesses who, are being squeezed by having to provide healthcare coverage for their employees. I think having a single payer healthcare system would also allow the government to negotiate prescription drug prices, which is obviously a huge problem in West Virginia and elsewhere. And I also want to see us investing more in the National Health Services Corps so that we can, attract and retain more healthcare professionals in rural parts of our country, including West Virginia.
Well, one area you just talked about, you could find yourself immediately working on that if you get into Congress. There was a bill passed today that had to do with renegotiation. Trump has said, he previously had said that he supports that. Now he's saying he's going to veto it. So that might be on your desk on day one.
Right.
So I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find out more about your candidacy. If they want to donate or volunteer, where should they go?
Yes, you can go online to kunkelforcongress.com and follow us on social media at Kunkel for Congress.
Cathy Kunkel, candidate for West Virginia's 2nd District. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.